Hey guys, I'm Joe and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to kind of give you a beginner's guide to Adobe Premiere Pro. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to create a new project. So we'll go ahead and click Create New Project and we'll give the project a name, YouTube Tutorial, and we'll choose the location that we want to save. I've got mine defaulting to a folder on my D drive. Don't mess with any of the other settings and just click OK. So now Premiere Pro is loaded and ready to go, but you're probably looking at this going, I don't even know where to start. So let's give you a quick overview of all these different panels. Over here is basically your effects controls. So anytime you drop video images onto your timeline, any type of effect control is done in this panel. So if you need to scale something or move it, you can do all that stuff right here in this panel. This panel here is basically your render panel, and this is where you can actually see your video rendering out and see what it looks like before you actually export it. You've got over here, you've got your effects panel, and for the most part we'll probably only really deal with video transitions in this tutorial, and then you've got a bunch of other stuff here, but we won't really take a look at that. Possibly the history is a good one to take a look at. That'll show you anything that you've done or any steps that you've taken. So if you mess up, you can always go back and forth to get back to where you need to. Down here is your timeline. So this is where a lot of the magic happens, and it's where you drop your video, your image files, and then you can play around with them and move them around and cut them up, add audio overlay, and do a bunch of different stuff that we'll take a look at. And then over here is basically where your project files are. So anything that you import from video, any videos, any images, stuff like that, it'll all end up in this panel here. And then you have here, you have your basically your toolbar. And the main tools that we'll be looking at are your selection tool, your razor tool, and your text tool. So the selection tool, well, we'll take a look at these in a second. Let's go ahead and import some files. So to import files, we'll go up to File, and we'll click Import, or if you want to use the shortcut key, it's Control I, and we'll go ahead, actually we'll grab one video file, we'll add that, and then we've got some other files that I want to import from a different folder that are located right here. So we'll select all of those and click open, and it imports. So now we've got all our files here, and basically to get them into the timeline, we just select the file that we want and we drag it over. So now you can see that it's in the timeline, and I can go through and I can kind of play around with where in the timeline I am. Down here you have a slider tool that allows you to basically determine what your duration is up here. So the further to the right you go, the shorter that duration. Further to the left, the closer these increments are. And of course that doesn't change the actual video length, it's just changing your workspace and how detailed that workspace is from a timeline perspective. So let's shrink this back down and make it more manageable. So the first tool we'll take a look at, we've got our selection tool, we'll kind of take a look at that more in depth in a second, but let's take a look at our razor tool. So the razor tool allows you to cut up anything in your timeline. Another handy tool here is the link selection tool, and what that'll do is, so like right now my audio and video are linked together, but say I want to mess with those separately and I want to move things around. If I unlink them, now I can move just my video around, and it'll show me, hey, your time's off. And then I can bring them back together, and I should be able to relink them by selecting them. And yes, and now they're re-selected. So say you've got audio that you just want the video file and you want to get rid of the audio. If you unlink and select just the audio and then click delete, now the audio is gone and all you have is the video file. So now let's take a look at the razor tool. So the razor tool will allow you to cut up your video, and then you can select different sections, and maybe you want to move them around and rearrange them, or you just want to delete them. To delete, you just select and hit your delete key. So that's basically how you would cut up a video or splice up your video so that you can use pieces and parts or cut out stuff that you don't want rendered out. So that's basic video editing right there. So now let's go ahead and take a look at overlaying some stuff into this video. So I want to put my social media links on top of this video, and if I bring the timeline to where I can see them, I see that they show up right here, but that's not where I want them. So I'll go ahead and I'll click on that layer, and then if I look over here, I've got position, I've got scale, I've got rotation, anchor point. So I've got a couple of different things. I've got opacity, so I can change the opacity. So basically I want to move the position. So when I get over the number, I get a little slider bar, and I can click and drag left and right to make my image move. Or I can do this one and it'll go up and down, or I can click into them and manually adjust those values. So we want to go ahead and put this in this lower right, left hand corner, so we'll go ahead and do that. So now that's basically where I want it, maybe a little bit smaller, so I can do the same thing where I just kind of scale it down and then readjust where it's going. So that's basically where I want it. Now, with the way it's currently set up, basically it's just going to pop in at this point here. I don't want it to do that. I want to use some type of a transition to get it to slowly come in. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the effects panel. We'll open the video transitions, and we'll take a look at a wipe, and we'll just do a simple barn door. So I'll select that, and then I'll drag it down here until it shows up on that layer, and we'll do one for the end as well. I didn't get it, did I? So now we've got two barn doors, transitions, and you can see when I grab and drag, now you can see that transition in place. I can also make some adjustments to this transition. If I select it, you'll see over here in the effects control that I have some different options. I can give it a border, I can give it a border width, I can reverse it, or I can set the duration. So for this example, 1 second is plenty. And again, just like anything else, when I put my cursor over it, it gives me my slider option, and if I click, I can go left and right to change that duration. And 1 second is where I want to be, or I can click into it and I can manually change it to what I want and click enter. So now I have a transition that does pretty much what I want. And that's basically how you would do any transition. And so like if I'm transitioning between these cut frames, I can do the same thing. I can grab this and I can either put it here so that the transition is just on this frame, or maybe I want it on just this frame, or maybe I want it to be in between the two and kind of go across them. I can do that as well. Um, so you have some options with your transitions. So let's go ahead and take a look at something else, and we'll drop the subscribe onto the project. We'll change its length, and basically if you just, once you've got the red bracket with the arrow, you can click and hold, and you can change your duration for, especially for images. You can also do that for videos. If you right click on them, you can do a speed duration to adjust them. Again, slider, I can change those lengths. For this, I don't want to. So I've got my branding, and right now I can't see it because it's not in the timeline position. So I move my timeline, and obviously I don't want it to look like that, so I'm going to move it, and I'm going to shrink it down. And now I can put it where I want in the video. So the next thing that I want to take a look at is basically trying to do like a manual transition using keyframes that are set up in the effects controls. So we'll take a look at this branding PNG, and we'll give it a fade in effect, and we'll have it move from this corner up to this corner. So the way we do that is over here you have these little stopwatch icons, and if you click on them, it'll create what's called a keyframe, which basically marks the timeline. Basically it'll mark the timeline as like a starting or stopping point for something. So in this case, what we want to do is expand the opacity, and we want to turn it down to 0. So at this keyframe, the opacity is going to be 0. Now we'll take the timeline and we'll move it out to right at the end of the other overlay, and we want to put another keyframe, but this time we'll do 100%. And as you can see here, you can see it ramp from 0% opacity all the way to 100. And what that's going to do, if you watch, it will slowly fade in until it gets to 100% opacity at this time frame. So that is basically a manual transition. So now let's take a look at doing the transition of moving it from this corner to this corner. So for position, I want to turn on a keyframe. That's our starting position. Then I want to move down the timeline to basically the end of the timeline. And at that point, I will, I'm off the timeline. Okay. So I can see it, and now we'll just move it to where we want it to go. And so this is the end point, and that's where that transition keyframe is. So as you can see, as I back up through the video, it moves from this keyframe to this keyframe in a smooth transition. So that's kind of how you can do some of your own manual animations and transitions, and you can do that with pretty much all these options over here that has the stopwatch icon. You can turn them on or turn them off. If you turn them off, it'll delete all the existing keyframes for that selection basically. And that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful, and if this is your first time here, please go ahead and click the subscribe button. And if there's anything that you'd like to see in tutorial format, go ahead and leave that in the comment section. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.